So emotional bonding is very important. And the fact it's not distance dependent is interesting because the only thing in physics which is not really distance dependent is quantum entanglement or non locality. Uh, Other things fall off. Gravity falls off with distance, magnetism falls off with distance, electric fields fall off with distance. But telepathy doesn't. And quantum entanglement, which, as I'm sure most people will have heard of, when two particles have been linked together in the same quantum system, they move apart. They remain entangled in such a way that a change in one instantly is correlated with the change in the other over any distance. It could be a mile, it could be 1,000 miles. It doesn't fall off with distance. So telepathy is like that. And I think it's similar to quantum entanglement in the way also that the people have to be bonded in the first place before you can get this telepathic effect when they're separated. That the emotional bond, which I just talked about. So these things tell us something about it. It doesn't seem to be interfered with by electromagnetic fields, Faraday cages, and things like that. So something's going on which depends on connection that remains connected at a distance. And I think it's actually closely related to morphic resonance. That's why I got interested in telepathy in the first place, because on the basis of morphic resonance, which we haven't talked about yet, but my idea of memory and nature, it's the idea that similar things resonate with each other across time and space, from the past to the present. Well, telepathy typically happens simultaneously in the present. But you see, it could be like morphic resonance in the sense that if it was, say, 1 millisecond in the past, you wouldn't notice the difference. So I think it's a kind of morphic resonance, but a kind that's happening in the present. Now, you might then say, well, what's the medium for morphic resonance? And there are a number of different theories. I don't know whether we want to get into them or not, but my main emphasis is not really on theoretical speculation, but on empirical evidence. Do these things really happen? That's the most important thing, because if there's overwhelming evidence they really happen, not the 100% you were asking for to start with, but say 90%, then there'd be an incentive for a lot of scientists to think about how it might work and for constructive theory building. Now, there's a lot of unconstructive theory building at the moment. I now, thanks to the bane of my life is AI. And in my inbox, every week, I get at least 10 theories of everything generated by AI. And I'm afraid if I say what we really need is a theory of telepathy that takes into account morphic resonance, I'll start getting theories of telepathy generated by AI. And most of them are simply couched in vague generalities that don't really take us closer to any real understanding. So I'm a bit jaded with AI at the moment. But I'm hoping that the build-up of more evidence about telepathy, the study of telepathy in the animal world, animal-to-animal telepathy, the study of the evolution of telepathy, will also give us clues that will make it easier to understand what's going on. But right now, we're, I think, at the stage similar to that of Faraday in the 1840s when he was looking at electrical and magnetic fields. He showed that there were electrical and magnetic fields, but he didn't know how they worked. And it took 20 years before Maxwell came along with Maxwell's equations to try and explain how it worked. And then Einstein came along and said, oh, well, Maxwell's got it wrong because he depended on the ether. The ether doesn't exist. So Einstein changed it all. Then quantum electrodynamics came along and said, oh, it all depends on the zero-point energy field and virtual photons. Well, all this time, electric motors have gone on working and magnets have gone on attracting each other and so on. So I'm not that concerned with the theoretical side of it, but more with, the facts. Well, I think in our own culture, the people who have the most difficulty with these things are not the majority of the population, but the scientifically educated subset, and especially people who want to make everyone think they're really smart. Because even smart, educated people experience telepathy, but many of them feel they have to deny that it's really going on. Um, I mean, it's very common. All these things are common. Uh, we're not talking about something that only happens to a tiny number of special people. This is something, 50% of dogs seem to know when their owners are coming home, about 30% of cats. That's millions of dogs every day in the United States alone. These things are common. Um, and most people just accept them because they happen. Um, but if they then get into an intellectual discussion about it, then they're bound to meet a skeptic sooner or later who says, well, how do you know it's not just chance coincidence? And you just remember the times it happens, you forget the millions of times it doesn't. And they come up with these standard armchair arguments. And then people start floundering and they back off because they don't know how it works. Well, no one knows how it works. Now, it's true that in other cultures, telepathy is taken for granted. In most of Africa, India, the Arab world, most people just take these things for granted. I lived in India for 7 years, and among Indians, including Indian scientific colleagues, people say, well, of course, these things happen. And in relation to morphic resonance, the idea of memory and nature is just part of the standard Hindu and Buddhist worldview. So uh, when I first went to India, I thought of the idea of morphic resonance when I was doing research at Cambridge, biological research. And uh, when I first came up with the idea in Cambridge and discussed it with colleagues, they were very skeptical. A lot of them just didn't get what I was trying to say. It was hard for them to understand. When I went to India and mentioned the idea to even fairly uneducated Hindus, uh, they all said, "Oh yes, of course, there is this memory in nature. Ancient rishis have said this thousands of years ago and stuff." So I got like the opposite reaction in India than I got in England, where people just said, "Oh yes, so what?" sort of thing. Um, so certainly there are big cultural differences, and I think if one had looked at Europe in the Middle Ages, um, these psychic abilities were quite widely taken for granted. People didn't have a problem with it's. It's only really since we have the mechanistic model of nature, particularly the materialist theory that the mind is nothing but the brain confined to the inside of the head, that it becomes a problem. Because if all your mental activity is totally inside your head, insulated from the world by your skull, and then obviously telepathy can't happen because your thoughts are just electromagnetic fields inside your brain, or possibly with electrodes on the skull. With an EEG, you might measure them right next to the head, but certainly not capable of influencing people thousands of miles away. So that's the reason for the problem we have, because this idea of the mind is nothing but the brain, mental activity is nothing but brain activity, which is the default assumption within the academic world, and particularly the scientific and medical world. Well, I wouldn't use the word where for a start, because the word where implies that memory has to have a place. In other words, that it's spatial. But the very nature of memory is a relationship in time. And so it's a hypothesis that it's stored spatially. And obviously that is true of certain kinds of memory. If you have things engraved on stone, like the Ten Commandments, or Greek inscriptions and stuff, then memory is there etched in stone. It's set in stone. Um, or if you think it's just left traces of in material forms, the ancient Greeks had the idea of sealing wax. You leave an impression in sealing wax, and then there's a kind of memory of that impression. And then we've got updating writing on paper. Then we've got memory, magnetic tapes, and floppy disks, and now hard drives and flash drives and so on. All of these store memory in physical places. But that's not necessarily how our minds work. And the whole point of morphic resonance is that memory is a relationship in time, a transmission from the past through morphic resonance. And the idea is there's a resonance across time. So if you have something in the past here, something in the present here, there's a resonance from one to the other uh, across time and space. But it doesn't have to be stored somewhere in between. It's like the whole of the past is potentially present everywhere. And if I meet someone that I've met before and I recognize them, I resonate with myself seeing them in the past. And there's like a spark of resonance across time. It doesn't mean that, or that my memory of their face is being stored in some kind of cosmic hard drive in between. So you see, of course, the conventional theory of memory is that there are memory traces inside the brain, that there are modified nerve endings, synapses, possibly phosphorylated proteins in nerve membranes. More way out theories say it might be in DNA or RNA, especially modified to store memory. But the reason there's so many theories is because people have spent more than 100 years trying to locate memories in the brain, and they've failed over and over again. And the latest attempt, just in the last 2 or 3 years, has been where people have put lots of little electrodes into mouse brains so they can measure in enormous detail the activity of the mouse brain. And the mice then are trained to run a maze, and then you study when they're remembering how to go through the maze, the pattern of electrical activity in the brain. You get a very complex pattern of waves in the brain as they remember it. And people said, oh, here we found memory. It's all these waves on these particular nerve cells. But then at first they thought, at last we found the memory, located the memory. But then when they just studied in more detail, they found that the wave pattern remained the same when they remembered it, but it didn't stay in the same place of the brain. It could move from one place to another. It moved around a bit in the brain. And this is now called representational drift. And representational drift basically shows us that what's going on in the brain when memory happens is a wave pattern, a complex wave pattern. And what matters is the wave pattern. This fits very well with the resonance model of memory. But it doesn't fit with the idea that it's sort of frozen into particular cells or just particular nerve endings that have all got sort of switched on or switched off. So I don't think memories are stored in the brain. I mean, that's one of the reasons morphic resonance is controversial, because the conventional assumption, not just of scientists, but most people, just take it for granted memories must be in the brain. Where else could they be? Or possibly in other parts of the body memory, muscle memory, etc. But all these take for granted that memory is stored somewhere, that it's a thing, a material thing, or things that are located in space. I think it's just the wrong approach to memory. And of course, this has many implications, because if all your memories are stored inside your brain, the common assumption, then when you die and your brain decays, all your memories will be absolutely wiped out. Which is why atheists and materialists take it for granted that when you die, everything just goes blank. By contrast, all religions have some theory or other of survival of consciousness of bodily death, whether it's in a shadowy underworld like Hades or Sheol, or whether it's in purgatory or heaven or hell, or whether it's reincarnation. You're reincarnated, at least with unconscious memories, in another body. All of these theories presuppose the survival of memory, and none of them would be possible if memories were stored in the brain. So it seems to me this idea of our connection to those who've gone before is actually built into almost all human cultures. It's only really mechanistic materialism combined with hyper-individualism that has denied this. And as you say, if you think about it, it's hardly credible that we could be that independent of everything that's gone before. And obviously we're not. Culturally we're not. I mean, you and I didn't invent the English language. We inherited it as a going concern. And we didn't inherit all the cultural forms on which we depend, or all the science that we know, or all the literature and Shakespeare and poetry and so on. All of these we inherit an entire culture. And in families, we inherit family patterns. And my wife does a form of therapy called systemic family constellation therapy. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, probably many people listening have heard of it. But really, it's about finding patterns in families which have been inherited from previous generations, often unconsciously. And that memory in the family field, I think, is transmitted by morphic resonance, a kind of unconscious habit memory of the family patterns in previous generations. And they shape our behavior, whether we're aware of it or not. The whole point of the family constellation thing is that people are often influenced by unconscious patterns. And individual psychotherapy can't really get to the root of it because it's not about the individual, it's about their relationship to the group and the pattern of relationships within the family.